Alrighty, I think that's my cue. Everybody ready to get going? Hey everyone, thank you for coming to our event on the corporate takeover of housing in Atlanta. My name is Sean Keenan. I'm the housing reporter for Atlanta Civic Circle. I'm thrilled to be with you all today. And we are especially honored to be joined by our three wonderful panelists. But before we get into that, I want to make sure that anyone new joining us gets an opportunity to know our co-hosts for this discussion. Hosting our Abundant Housing Atlanta, which advocates for abundant, affordable housing and inclusive, sustainable communities across Metro Atlanta. They do that by educating the community about housing shortages, working to identify real solutions, and building political will to create change. Tech Equity Collaborative mobilizes tech workers and companies to advance structural change that addresses economic inequity at its roots. They do so by way of education, public policy, and corporate practice change in housing and labor. And lastly, Atlanta Civic Circle's mission is to inform the public on the most critical issues facing Metro Atlanta, such as affordable housing, by providing in-depth reporting and presenting possible solutions with opportunities for civic engagement online and in the community. Okay, so before we dive into this, I think I should introduce our panelists. And mention that I don't think this will be a problem, but I want to remind everyone that this is going to be a cordial discussion, and we will field your questions via the Q&A function towards the end of the webinar. This will also be recorded, and shared at the end of the event. Feel free to share it out as needed. All right, firstly, Allison Johnson is the executive director of advocacy group Housing Justice League, which helps people secure safe and stable housing and lobbies for fair housing practices in local government. Dr. Laura Raymond is an assistant professor of city and regional planning at the Georgia Institute of Technology, who studies housing. And Mike Alexander is the chief operating officer of the Atlanta Regional Commission, the regional planning and intergovernmental coordination agency representing the Atlanta Metro. Now, before we really dig in, I want to talk a little bit about why we're here today. Everyone knows Atlanta was already losing affordable housing at breakneck pace, seemingly dropping units by the hour. Now the city and Metro Atlanta have become magnets for deep-pocketed corporate investors who are buying up property left and right, often turning single-family homes into costly rental properties and depriving underserved communities of much-needed affordable housing. We've assembled this panel of experts to attempt to dissect what many see as Wall Street's takeover of Atlanta, and hopefully explore where we can go from here. So to kick us off, I hope maybe we could start with you, Mike. This seeming phenomenon has been all over the news of late, corporate investors snatching up scores of Atlanta property, especially in underinvested areas. I hope you could kind of help us put the scope of this trend into perspective. How often is this happening? Where is it happening? Who's it affecting? I understand you have some slides to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't be happier to be here today. Thank you so much, Sean. Again, my name is Mike Alexander with the Atlanta Regional Commission, your friendly neighborhood regional planning commission. And we have a long history of working with our local governments to understand housing as a policy issue. It's a fundamental work program for us, and we've been coordinating for over 50 years, understanding the needs of our citizens and residents as it relates to housing, and trying to put it all together into programs and policies that help our local governments in particular address these critical needs. And with the stump speech over, I think we recognized early in the data that we saw a long time ago, actually, and it's over a decade ago, coming out of the Great Recession, which was so impactful on Metro Atlanta, that institutional investors, private equity firms in particular, well over a decade ago, started buying up land. And of course, they needed to do something with that land. They started buying homes, and we were hearing, and we were talking about it earlier, anecdotally, how they were starting to buy this, and it buy these homes, and it went quiet for a relatively long time because it took so long to get out of the Great Recession. So then what happened is that the markets really turned. We went from a majority of homes in a place like Clayton County in the southern part of our region being underwater, with the people that did own their homes owed more on those homes than the homes were worth, to where we are today, as Sean was just describing. And from our perspective, that happened relatively quickly. In a policy standpoint, from a policy framework, it caught us off guard that we'd be in this place where we're seeing these incredible price increases and this demand where people are really struggling to buy homes, to become new homeowners. And for us, we had to go look at the data. We have been looking hard at the parcel data, and there's been a lot of information published about recent purchases. But what we've been doing is trying to understand the scale of who actually owns these homes by jurisdiction for us at the ARC. And I'm going to show some slides maybe in just a few seconds about that. And I got to thank our wonderful research staff that have been so diligent in running these queries, running these big data queries to understand this. And so these institutional investors can really have to be thought of really as publicly traded, and then the private equity firms. And it's relatively easy for us to understand what's happening with the publicly traded companies because they literally publish what they own and where. But for the private equity firms, we've had to build some pretty sophisticated queries to look at all of the different ownership records that are publicly in that parcel data, so you can understand how one company may have dozens and dozens of LLCs that capture what they've actually owned. And we boil this research down into this pretty simple idea. We want to focus on the largest institutional investors. So you'll see us, I'm about to share my screen, talking about institutional investors at a scale where they own more than 5,000 homes. And if you think about it, that's a really big number. And I'm just to take another second, if you think about it, owning large numbers of single family homes over 15 years ago just wasn't a thing. And what they've really figured out is that they can own these homes, they can have maintenance programs for them. And that's a relatively new idea in the United States. So from my perspective, that you own 5,000 homes and are actively managing those in a particular metro market is something that is very, very different for us. And we're still grappling with that. But in that parcel data, there are 6 big owners that own more than 5,000 properties. And so, Sean, I don't want to get too far ahead of this conversation, but if you want me to show the deck, I can now, or we can wait and continue on with the questions and the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how many slides you have, but I'd be interested at least in a sort of bird's eye view.
And I'm happy to put these in the chat, and hopefully everybody can see this now. Can you see it, Sean?
Yeah, I got it.
All right, so it boils down to a simple table in the end, but this is a lot of work to get this to a place where we can summarize it for you. So if you're thinking about counties and we think about all the single family homes, how many are owned by a business? And in some cases, this may actually be a land trust, but the majority of these owned by a business are people that are buying these homes as investments. And so our most recent count of March 2022 data shows you that the single family residents, the total 1.5 million, 160,000 are now owned by businesses. And of the big 6, that number is about 44,000. So if you look at this by a share, you'll see a county like Paulding County, where 6.7% of all single family homes now are owned by big six and institutional investors, and the names are on the left. And we're not trying to call in any particular attention to one company over another, but at some point you've got to grapple with literally the names to build these queries. But more importantly, from our perspective, is to always make it spatial. And so if you look at these dots, you'll see a very, very specific pattern. And where you won't see these institutional investors buying homes in large numbers is clearly in the core of the region. If you're not from Metro Atlanta, you see the loop, that's I-285, but inside of 285, we always call that the core, inside the perimeter. But that's where by square foot now our most expensive homes are. And generally that follows up the 400 corridor into Forsyth County, and you just don't see many dots there because the pricing for them to buy homes, I think, is and has historically been homes, existing homes under generally $300,000. And so from our perspective, when you look at this, these orange bands, you're talking about, in some cases, ex-urban counties, counties relatively far away. So when you look at the share of this by census tracts, you'll see the big six where you've got some census tracts where, and we highlighted this, 19% of the homes in a community, that's what census tracts really are, is communities are owned by institutional investors. And these are single family homes, not multifamily, single family homes. And so we're trying to grapple with this impact and to get at your question, Sean, most directly. If we look at the change in Black population by census tract, and then we map out on the right the number of single family properties owned by institutional investors, you see a pattern here. And this has been reported by others like the Washington Post, and I'll be happy to talk about that in more detail. But the map really is worth 1,000 words, I think, on this pattern of what's happening. And based on these price points, it's clearly communities where, all things being equal, historically, first-time home buyers would be the primary purchasers of these homes prior to the Great Recession. And this is a big change in the way our markets work for single-family housing.
Thanks, Mike. Dr. Raymond, I'd like to bring you in here. I know Atlanta is not alone in dealing with this crush of big money investor interest, but it's my understanding that we're facing this problem at a scale unlike most major cities. So what is it about Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, that invites this kind of investor behavior that we're seeing on Mike's slides?
I'm going to speculate a little bit, but certainly the initial interest had to do with the legacy of the subprime and foreclosure crisis. The first bulk purchases that were done in Atlanta were, bank-owned homes. These firms started as distressed property investors during the foreclosure crisis. And they suspect that they're adding market share around those initial foreclosures. I don't know whether that has to do with economies of scale or whether that has to do with strategies around maximizing the value of their collateral because they borrow against the value of these homes. So obviously, if you bought a bunch of homes for $50,000, maybe you can borrow a certain percentage of that value. But if you start buying homes in that same area that serve as comps, right, for $200,000, all of a sudden you can borrow against your whole portfolio to a much higher rate because the value of everything just went up. That's speculation. But I would wonder if an initial investment 10 years ago, that if they're building portfolios around that. The other thing is that once you have a certain percentage of homes in a given submarket, you can start to set rates. You're not a price taker, you're a price maker. And so if you can, we're looking at the percentage of homes. What if we looked at the percentage of homes for rent? would that 19% go up much higher, right? Because not every home, not every single family rental in a given school zone, right, is for rent in a given year. So if you're a tenant looking, are you seeing 50% of all the rentals owned by the big six? Or are you seeing something less than that? I mean, that's a different way to calculate market share. And in general, when you look at the buy box for these companies, you look at what kinds of housing stock they like. They like newer construction. They like single family homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They like metros that have the long-term growth trajectory that Atlanta has. So I think it's a combination of all those factors. And, there is this historic, we didn't find this out until well into the financial crisis the last time, where everybody was saying, well, why is all this subprime lending happening in these areas? And we could only speculate. Well, years later, they did the court cases, they subpoenaed all the emails, and they found out it was absolutely racist. It was guided by these racist notions that these were communities that were fair game for predatory practices. Now, I don't want to speculate. I'm being a little bit more freer here in this forum than I would elsewhere, but I'm not going to rule that out. I just have no evidence to say that that's what's guiding it. But certainly in the past in Atlanta, when you see predatory housing practices, that has absolutely been one of the reasons.
So, Allison, if I could bring you in here, we're talking a lot about, the systems that affect people who could otherwise be first-time home buyers. And Dr. Raymond is discussing, these racist and predatory practices. I hope you could help us understand the human element of this phenomenon, this Wall Street takeover. I guess it's easy to consider the daunting numbers and think of the architectural and developmental impact, the way it affects communities' built environment. But I think it's important to remember that this trend is affecting people's lives. It's shifting the cultures of these neighborhoods. So what does that look like on the ground? What happens to these families? Allison, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you. So listening to the data provided by Mike and all of the research that Dr. Laura Raymond has done, and also through the lived experiences from folks on the ground in community, it's really evident that the lineage of racialized housing is a continuum of that in our communities. And what that means is that people are continuing to see these housing insecurities at a greater increase than they did even back in the 60s and 70s. And what it also means is that people are locked out of the potential of becoming homeowners. And it also means that when people don't have these opportunities to housing, they also don't have an opportunity to secure a future for their children and their children's children. So it's a generational opportunity it would be a generational opportunity for us for those who want to be a part of the home buyers network, or whatever we shall call it. But it's also a huge box out and lockout of opportunities, particularly for those in working class communities, particularly those in Black communities. It's a devastating piece of way that we haven't learned how to really tackle it. As you see the data that's shown that how all of these investors have been able, to continue to be predators in our communities, it really has a generational effect on us, because we know that housing for some of us, it's the most secure piece of justice that most of us have in terms of securing our future. And so for us, it just means that we won't have these opportunities, not for myself, not for my children, probably not for my grandchildren. And it's something real that we have to learn how to really combat, because in our communities, we have just been devastated. We haven't actually recouped from the 2008-2009 housing foreclosure. We've been pushed further into smaller options of how we want to live in our communities, and why and how that really shapes our futures and our children's futures. So it's pretty devastating for us.
Okay, so you talked about how we have to learn to combat these predatory practices, and a lot of your work with Housing Justice League has actually spurred city legislation in the past, helping develop a model for, say, the Tenants' Bill of Rights most recently. What does Wall Street's interest in Atlanta mean for activists like yourself? I mean, what kind of reforms are you looking for now? Who do you talk to? Are there city council members, state lawmakers? Like, is there a sense that even engaging the investor community could be worthwhile? Like, what does this look like from your perspective?
So what it looks like for us is that Atlanta has a housing crisis, and this housing crisis hasn't just happened, and it's been there for a while. So for us as renters and us for organizers with people who are in the rental market, it seems that somebody's finally, paying attention. And it seems that, some of the work that not only our organization is doing, but many other organizations are doing, is that we have to figure out how do we incorporate renters into our communities, because we have been so undervalued in our communities, but we are such a strong asset to our communities. So what we want Wall Street to do is to really talk about how do they participate in our communities? How do they show up? And I know one for us, what has been a very intricate way of providing, other and different means of housing is one way has in our community in our communities have been through our community development corporations. They have been one organization or different organizations that have really been able to demonstrate how to provide housing, how to provide affordable housing, and how you sustain that. So we need for Wall Street to make sure that they are putting dollars on the ground, because the best research and data that you're going to get is that lived experience. And if we are not talking to the people that are impacted the greatest, we're going to continue to circle and just talk about numbers, but we need for Wall Street to see that these numbers are actual people.
Thank you. So, Dr. Raymond, Allison was just talking about, and somebody else also mentioned in the comments, that Metro Atlanta and Georgia are very pro-landlord.
Yeah.
Andre Dickens even said recently that he's working with federal officials to try to find out ways to rein in these investment landlords and I guess regulate their practices. But does that seem like a pipe dream? I mean, considering your experience studying these trends, like what kind of changes are actually feasible?
I want to pick up on what Allison just said and say that I absolutely agree with everything she just said. There's an economics view towards this that, we have deficient supply and demand has outpaced supply. And if we just build more homes, then prices will come down. And my research has really shown that what's really important actually is the power imbalance between tenants and landlords. And we need to attend to that. That's part of what's happening here, is that tenants don't have enough power in our state. And the federal government can do some things, but we need to fix our landlord-tenant law. And also we need the nonprofit sphere to fully invest in community organizations. We do a great job with voting rights in Atlanta. We don't have the type of capacity and the type of investment and engagement from philanthropic groups, from CDFIs, around tenants organizations. When I go look at what's going on in Boston and I see how their communities are supporting their eviction data initiatives and their tenant organizations, when I look at what's happening in Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, I don't understand why every single CDFI, CDC in Atlanta isn't knocking on Allison's door right now and saying, what you're doing is really vital. It's really important to support tenants across the city, whether they're in single family homes or multifamily. And Wall Street is not going away. They're 2% nationwide. They're going to be 10% nationwide in not too long. We may regret that this is happening. This is not going away.
But is it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
And we're in a state that doesn't protect our tenants. And everybody's saying, wow, this is affecting the middle class now. People who make $80,000, $100,000 a year are living in these single family rentals in the suburbs, and they're getting evicted and have terrible living conditions that tenants have been putting up with for years. now more than ever is time to say, this is destructive, it's unsustainable, it destroys our school systems, it makes employment difficult, and we need to make renting a much better situation for the health of our community. So I'm not answering your question generally, but I'm trying to shift away from this kind of supply demand focus that I hear coming out of the federal government, which is going to help, and focus on what we need to do at the state and city level, which is focus on tenants' rights, support our legal aid groups, support our tenant organizations, and fund them, give them the funding to have staff to do the work they're doing. I'm not being touchy-feely here, I'm being as pragmatic as I can to say that is what we need.
Yeah, but is it as simple as political will? I mean, we talk about things like Tenants' Bill of Rights. There are these other cities that you just mentioned that we could mimic legislatively. But a lot of this goes up at the state level, where historically there's not been an appetite for tenant protections, where historically Georgia has been very friendly to landlords and investors. So what does it take? I mean, these landlords are creating interesting political cross currents. They are legislating to do preemptive, anti-exclusionary zoning, so they can do build to rent wherever they want in the state of Georgia. You can find new allies than you have in the past around this issue and around tenants' rights. I don't know exactly how to push for things that might be awesome, like rent control, but to some extent, I think that community power and legal power are two different things. And what we really need to build is community power, and legal power will move with it.
Right.
That makes sense. Like there's markets, there's legal power, and there's community power. And what we really don't have right now is like community power. And it's a little bit more ephemeral for some reason than like using equations and talking about supply and demand, but it's really vital, and we don't have it right now in Atlanta. And that's why they're eating our lunch. That's why they're eating our lunch, because we're not defending our tenants the way Boston does. Boston would never put up with this. And Atlanta needs to take a stand and say, hey, housing is vital. We need to look after it.
Yeah. Can I just add to that?
Yeah, please.
What you're saying? Absolutely. And that is what is missing out of Atlanta, is the real community power. It's an old saying, nobody's gonna do anything unless you make them do it. Because we have introduced something that's called this Bill of Rights. Although it is very important, and it's moving, and it's moving through city council, but this isn't something that's just a metropolitan issue. This is a statewide issue. This is why we are building through all of the corners, throughout all of the corners of the state of Georgia, because it is impacting everyone. In Atlanta, 56.5% folks are renters. And if we can't come out with a collective voice around why it's so important for us to really shift that power between landlords and tenants, then we're going to have a very difficult time, not just making folks have the political will, but people also have to be very inspired to talk about and live within their communities. We talk a lot about, we want to build this, we want to bring in that, but that's not going to be the answer to all of these issues. What's really plaguing our communities is that missing middle. That missing middle are the people, and it's the people who are impacted that don't have the voices to go down and legislate for themselves, to talk to city council persons. And that's the work that we're trying to do. This Tenants' Bill of Rights is not just for a particular population of folks. It is to serve everybody in the state of Georgia. You're right, Atlanta is decades behind other cities in terms of protecting our tenants. Why shouldn't our tenants be able to go to court and fight for their homes? Why shouldn't they? Why should they not be protected with legal representation? Why should they continue to be hoarded out in evictions? Why? It's because we don't believe in the power of tenants, and that is missing. And we have to do a better job. We all have to do a better job about engaging, teaching, information about, what's happening, what are your rights, how do I stay in my community, and what do people really want? How do people want to remain in their community? People want to be stable. And we don't have that here in the state of Georgia. We don't have the political will, but we're pushing on them. We know that this is not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. We not know that this is something that's going to be one thing that's going to fix it all. But with the community power and the community voices, it's definitely going to push us toward our goals. And we do. We have to have some rent control in this state. It is out of control. We can't live here. I'm not going to be able to organize here in a minute. And that's not right. I'm a native here. I need to be in my community with my family, with my sisters, with my brothers. I should not have to be priced out of a place because I'm a renter and I'm not protected.
Dr. Raymond, it looks like you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you had asked about kind of federal action. I think there's a lot of appetite at the federal level to increase the supply of housing construction, to push back on exclusionary zoning, and, you know, to do the kind of stuff that this group supported in terms of like transitory development. That's not actually going to change the value proposition for Wall Street. I support all those things for other reasons, but Wall Street loves this kind of lowly regulated, you know, high construction environment. I mean, the types of policies that are being promoted at the federal level are great, but it doesn't fix this specific problem. And this specific problem has a lot to do with the types of tenant power issues that that Allison's talking about. So I think legal changes at the state level are important, but I also think just having a much more robust engagement by all of our nonprofits, all of our community organizers, and all of our funders around this issue is needed. And that's what I really get sad about. I don't see the level of engagement with tenants, you know, and there's a lot of support for new development, for other things like that. But people really need to understand that tenants are a key part of our society, and we need to stabilize this situation because it's unsustainable. So that's it.
How far can bolstering renters' protections take us? And like, so what is the gold standard in America right now? You mentioned Boston and some other cities have pretty severe or significant tenant protections. But you know, how far can we take that until we actually have to more severely regulate Wall Street in the way that it is able to invest in residential communities?
I mean, I think there's some stuff in terms of secondary financial markets that we can't affect too much at this kind of regional level. And I do think that the federal government is kind of looking into it. I don't know what the political will is, but there's certainly, their attention is here now. But I don't want to say like, oh, well, we can't do anything unless Biden acts. Like, that's just not gonna, that's not to me realistic. And I think there's a lot we can do at the local level. That's really important. And it may be that, hey, we can't stop these guys from buying up homes. The homes are more valuable to them than they are to any household, but at least they'll be better landlords.
Yeah.
If we can't stop them from coming into our communities, at least they can stop having these extremely high eviction rates, terrible maintenance records, et cetera, and so on, you know? And that would be a win for me. I don't need to run these guys, you know, out of town. I just want them to stop being destructive landlords.
So, I mean, as difficult as it may be legislatively, rent control keeps coming up. I know that the state has prohibited it. How far could that take us if we were able to repeal those bans? Most house reps, I would wager, do not understand when you tell them the rate of rental increases that people are facing. They're like, oh, that must be illegal. Like, I don't think the conversation has fully been had about rent control in this state, to be honest, because people just have this negative first reaction. Then you say, yeah, this person's rent went from $1,200 to $2,400 in the course of a year. And they say, wow, that ought to be a law, you know? Yeah. So I don't know if that's a third rail of Georgia politics. I'm not, but I would say that I would more fully have that conversation with people. Okay. Mike, I want to bring you back in here. I don't mean to have abandoned you. I guess I'm curious if you could talk about some of the conclusions you've drawn as you've parsed this data, as well as, if possible, do you have a way of predicting what the future could look like if we do not install more renter protections, rein in Wall Street investors. What could it look like if things don't change? And then conversely, what happens if we're able to enact these reforms that Allison and Dr. Raymond are talking about?
Yeah, I'd say watching this information for a long time, Dr. Raymond and Allison, I think, have really created a broad conversation, and I am fascinated by where this conversation is going, because it is a challenge, right? From my perspective, one of the things that's truthfully close to me always is just the fact that the average Black household in America has 10% of the wealth of a white household. 10%. And that really drives the way I think about our research. So the home ownership gap between a Black household and a white household in Atlanta right now is about 26 percentage points. White households 74.5%, a Black household 48%. The share of Black households owning a house has gone up a little bit coming out of the Great Recession, from a low of around 41 up to 48. But that disparity really influences the way we have been trying to understand the data side of this work. And if you're looking across our counties, the home ownership rate really from 2000 to 2019 has fallen in almost every county. Fewer people as a share own homes at the county level across this metropolitan region. And for low income and middle income households, and that's households making less than $75,000 a year, the majority of your wealth is in that home. And so when I'm thinking about that 10% and that these numbers are falling, and now you've got these institutional investors in the market in a fundamentally different way with falling home ownership rates looking forward, I mean, it's tough for us to see where that home ownership rate is going to change positively. Acknowledging everything else that's been said, I want us to be committed as a community that this wealth gap is something we've got to be working relentlessly to address. And this is one part of this equation, is this home ownership. And so, you know, I showed you that earlier number of just the big six and how many they own. That decline in the net number of households making 75 or less over that period from 2012 to 2019 represents about 59,000 households, fewer in our low and middle income, which is scaling with this change in the net ownership of just the big six. So clearly there is an economic tension that's going to continue in these markets. And I've been adding slides to the deck that I posted so that everybody gets access to this. But if you just do a Google, you'll see our local governments thinking about this. Clayton County put a moratorium on single family rented homes, and they've been thinking about these subdivisions. All of them have, because they have been getting these rezoning applications. And some of the questions I know we're going to answer, you were asking me that in this session, but it's already apparent to them. And we have, it's quite an acronym even for the ARC, Local Leaders Housing Action Committee, where we really got core elected officials meeting monthly, chaired by the chair of Gwinnett County, talking about these housing issues. And Dr. Raymond, you're right, it's not just supply. So supply, I think, absolutely matters, but putting this all together and really focusing on people to speak to what Allison is saying at the heart of what she's saying is going to be critical. What I want to say again, Allison, what did you say? It's about understanding people's lived experience. And that's really where we are. Can we make this place work for everyone, right? And that's, I know I'm a data geek and I love the data side of it, but I think, Allison, you're absolutely right. Can we make this place work for everyone? If you're in a place where renting is absolutely necessary, we want it to be and work for you. But I would like to see that home ownership rate change. And that's why, you know, I've tried to load this with some real data to make sure we're on this playing field where we understand what the facts are. So we're all in this together is the simplest way I can put it. And, I'd like to think everybody's operating from a good place, and everybody thinks they're trying to do good, but we need to get to a common understanding of how people's lived experience is truly being impacted.
Sure. So we have to move on to the Q&A in just a moment. But something you said, Mike, kind of reminded me of this question that I wrote with Allison in mind. I mean, Allison, as head of the Housing Justice League, I know you face so many bleak realities in your efforts. So, Atlanta's affordable housing crisis gets worse by the day. Could you talk maybe just briefly about sources of hope or optimism in this uphill battle? I mean, we have a lot of new faces in our elected offices. Maybe there's some new champions for fair housing policy, or maybe little wins along the way that provide silver linings. I mean, what do you look for? What do you look to for sources of inspiration that keep you going forward?
Well, what I look to as sources of inspiration is that we've been working with residents in Forest Cove for quite a while. And to have people actually living in the conditions and remain committed to a place that has not treated them well, and people who had not treated them well still, dug deep and saw the fight inside of themselves and wanted to become their own advocacies, in order for them to be relocated and to come back to a property that would be much better than the current situations where they were living. And so although I do this work, my inspiration is truly drawn from the people who are in the same conditions as I once was and some time ago. But I want to say what we really see some hope is that we have seen some change in our council folks, and they have been actually supportive because they are really engaged in their communities. They understand what their communities are talking about and saying. They see their communities changing right in front of them. So they understand that this is something that can't sit by the wayside, and they can allow to continue. Now, what we still want to see is we want to push them further. Because having a tenants bill of right, yes, that's great, but this isn't going to really mitigate the issue of people really being displaced out of their communities. But I always want to think about hope as how do we engage people? How are people showing up in the processes? And are they decision-making people in their spaces and in their communities? And right now, we have to have people, not just the people who are impacted, but we have to have our community allies to stand with us and support us in this work. As we door knock and as we talk to people about what's happening with them and what do they want to see with their communities, I think the most valuable, inspirational piece that I can take with me is that people are committed and connected in their communities and they don't want to leave. They just want a better opportunity in their community. So I'm drawn from my inspiration by both, those that are elected and by both of those who are still in the struggle trying to make something better.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think it's time for me to yield my time, and we'll move on to a few Q&As from the chat, I believe. We're running a little bit over, but and I think some of you have to run, but I will turn it over to first been assembling these questions from the chat.
Hi, and thank you so much for this amazing conversation. It's been such a delight to hear from all of you and learn from all of you. I'm bringing everyone back into the spotlight because a lot of these questions are going to be for all of you. So I might direct some of them to some of you, but feel free to just chime in wherever you feel appropriate. We have a couple of questions about, in terms of the corporate investors coming in and purchasing homes, how many of them, and maybe this is good for you, Mike, how many of these homes owned by big investors were purchased, existing homes by investors, or were built by the investors themselves?
Yeah, and I'm old enough now, hitting the 50s, to say, and have the courage to say, I don't know. More research is needed. And I don't mean to be dismissive in any way. It is hard to see that in the parcel data. There are whole subdivisions when you look at the point details down to the subdivision level that are owned by institutional investors. So that has happened. But I don't know how many specific subdivisions. But this is something that turned us onto this over a decade ago, was someone proposing a subdivision to be built from scratch for rent exclusively. And we know it's happened. We just don't have the count. And my commitment to everyone on this webinar today is that all these questions I will scrape and download and process with our staff. And if we can answer them, we definitely will, and try to report that through our own mechanisms here at the ARC and through the Atlanta Civic Circle, because I think it's a great question.
Great, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to the data, and thank you for sharing the slides. For everyone who was wondering, we'll be sharing out the slides at the end as well, in a follow-up email. Another question, which I think can go to anyone really, is what impact does the growth of tech play in the growing housing crisis? Are these tech companies coming in, making it less affordable? Is the influx of capital maybe going to be helpful in construction? What's going on?
Well, I know that Atlanta has the highest rental growth in the Southeast, and the third highest in demand for housing, right behind Houston and in Dallas. And so, as we see folks coming into the city, that there's a demand for the type of housing, and prices are astronomical, that would otherwise, we think, could, help support. And that kind of housing supply should be not for folks just moving in, but for everyone who's working in the city of Atlanta. So I think we have to think about a diversified way of how we incorporate everybody that's here now and folks that are moving in. So we have to be very diligent about how are we going to use our means and our resources that we have to make sure that there's a diversified way that everybody here in Atlanta gets to live.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I don't know, Dr. Raymond, if you want to. I mean, the number of announcements recently just on manufacturing in exurban areas, the Microsoft announcement, what's going to happen in the Grove Park community, illuminates the pressure that's going to occur. I mean, the housing price pressure is just going to get that much more dramatic. I can't say it's not. I keep adding slides to the deck that I posted, so if you just keep downloading it, you'll see it. But I'm stuck by the Zillow observed rent number. And if you look at it and you look at what I just posted, and you can look at it on their dashboard, I mean, rent across all property types went in 2014 from about a little less than 1,100 to over 1,938. And if wages have barely increased over that period, it makes your point, Allison. I hate to be so factual. I just look at that slide and I panic. Right? Because I know that it's that much harder, and it's that much more likely my teenagers will be in our house for a very long time, because I can't recommend to them that it's cost efficient to move out. Save your money, and all kidding aside, if you're in a place where you're looking for housing now, I just don't even know what to say as a human being to you, because these prices have done something that is making it very hard on people, and we know that, and that's why we're all here talking today. And it is a little bit supply, but this is a global issue at this point. I can't say this enough, and yeah, go ahead, Dr. Raymond.
Yeah, as you're talking, it makes me think about different mechanisms that we have at the local and regional level to decommodify housing. I mean, part of what's going on is that houses, our land prices are rising to meet the highest bidder. And if that highest bidder is a Wall Street investor or somebody who, makes a really great wage because they work in the tech industry, land prices are extracting as much as possible. And so if we were talking about art or lattes, I really wouldn't care. But housing is a basic need. And, when prices go up this high, it's hard for everybody. Everybody is paying too much. So things like community land trusts, I know public housing has been done and gone in here in Atlanta, but maybe things like a fully funded, large-scale community land trust and thinking about mechanisms through land banks, through deed restrictions, to push that money into those types of mechanisms for permanent affordability, quite simply, because we don't need to play this investment game with our houses to the extent that we're doing it. We can play the, leave that for the NFTs, right? Let's do speculative, price rises with those types of goods, but let's keep housing, water, food, those kinds of things affordable in this city. So those are some of the options that we have. They're hard to scale, but yeah, I think those are things city council could push on. And I also would say, don't sell public land. Stop selling public land. Don't sell it, lease it, do other things with it, but do not lose ownership of it. It's only getting more expensive and we're not building any more here in Atlanta of land. Yeah.
Agree.
Absolutely. I think we have about time for one more question, and then Sean, I'll pass it back to you. Obviously, from this discussion, we can tell that this issue is very vast and very complex. So as individual people, what can we do? Where can we start? And how can we show up?
Well, I know I can say how people can, what you can do is you can get involved with community organizations, get involved with those communities organizations that are already in existence and see where, you can use your skills to support those that are already in communities that are trying to remain in their communities. You can also you can join us at Housing Justice League if you feel like canvassing and door knocking and talking about this crisis, but also having some solutions to this crisis. Be a part of these organizations, because these on the ground organizations are actually is what's going to push that policy forward. So, and have these conversations with your neighbors, your neighbors that don't understand and don't know for whatever reasons. We encourage you, to be in different communities and be in different conversations and meet people and really talk about how housing should really be a human right.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I think we've come a long way since the conversation started, but we still have a long way to go in terms of even moving the needle with this scourge of Wall Street interest in Atlanta. So thank you, Dr. Raymond, Allison, Mike, for being with us today. I think this has been incredibly valuable to the community. On behalf of Atlanta Civic Circle, I just want everyone to note that we appreciate you attending. If you're interested in reading more about the region's affordable housing crisis, you can check out my work at atlantacivicircle.org. Abundant Housing Atlanta, I would like to say, if you live in Metro Atlanta and want to advocate with your neighbors for the kinds of change we discussed today, feel free to join. If you're outside Atlanta, check out YIMBY Action, which is Yes in My Backyard, to find a chapter in your area. Tech Equity would like to say, if you are a tech worker that wants to change your impact on the surrounding community, join them. We will send a follow-up email to everyone with the link to the recording and resources that our panelists have shared. And I think that does it for us. Thank you so much to everyone who's been here. I really enjoyed this. I would solicit a round of applause if it wouldn't sound so silly on Zoom. All right, with that, I think we're signing off. Thanks, everybody. I guess maybe one or two of you are sticking around to perhaps talk with a journalist or two.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks so much. Everyone have a good one.